Hi, and welcome back to Gin and Talk. In today's episode, we're talking about the revival of gin.
Yes, indeed.
Yes.
I want to ask you a question, Yana, to start.
Okay.
Do you remember what the first spirits were that you were drinking?
Yeah, I remember a time when I thought vodka cranberry was cool, bourbon and Coke.
Okay.
Yeah, and Jägermeister.
Ah, Jägermeister.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, I would say probably similar for me.
Yeah?
And I want to use that as an example of kind of how gin over the years has kind of risen and fallen, has declined and inclined.
Yeah.
And we're definitely at a place in the world right now where gin is just on the rise big time.
Yeah.
So, the initial kind of like decline before we get into today,
Yeah.
or I wouldn't say initial, but more recent, if you will.
Yeah.
Like you were saying, you were drinking like whiskey, right? Tequila, vodka, as was I when I was a younger man.
Yes.
Gin just kind of wasn't that cool.
It wasn't cool at all. Yeah.
15 years ago, really, like for our generation.
Yeah.
And that's really a big difference in the trend of anything in the world, right? It's
Yeah.
like what's in, what's not in. And at that time, those were the spirits that were cool. Vodka definitely took the world by storm in the 1930s, 40s, and beyond. Really took a dominant hold over some of the most like trend-setting drinking markets in the world over that time. And gin kind of fell by the wayside.
Yeah.
I think there wasn't a lot of change in the category of gin for a long time. It was always kind of this really classic London dry style. I mean, gins we love today, but still there wasn't all that much change. Everything was juniper forward, everything was like citrusy and strong. And I feel like it also kind of it was like gin martinis was kind of like an old man drink.
It was,
you know, for a while.
Yeah, I didn't really know how to drink a martini back then.
Yeah.
And I always confused a martini also. Like my impression of it was way different than what I know of it now. And also, I think there wasn't like really a proper way of drinking gin, right? Like you won't do it as a shot. The only thing I know how to drink gin was as a gin and tonic, and that wasn't very appealing to me at that time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would agree, and I think, also that's a good example too, because like tonics have really gone a long way.
Evolved,
Now there's so
right?
many like flavors, and like it's like another crafty category,
Yeah.
right? That's can be a more elevated drink than I think it was thought to be, even 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So that's all changed,
Yeah.
right? And we're living in a world now where there are so many different brands of gin and so many different types of gin.
Yeah.
And I think, a huge reason for the growth of the category is it's a great way to showcase locality.
Yeah.
So certain regions in the world definitely have very specific spirits tied to them, whether it's, agave-based spirits or tequila mezcal in Mexico, Scotch in Scotland,
bourbon.
Yeah, bourbon in the U.S., so on and so forth. Gin, though, it gives basically a platform where wherever you make it, you can really focus on indigenous ingredients and botanicals, right? And I think that's something that we see very commonly in gin today.
Yes.
So, for example, we have a couple of gins here in Singapore, or more than a couple of gins, and they tend to focus on, Southeast Asian indigenous ingredients.
Yep.
And that's literally all over the world, whether it's a gin being made in Australia or South Africa. South Africa, we see like rooibos, very commonly used. The list goes on and on. Also, I would attain to that the micro distillation boom of the last 10, 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
Some years ago, I was actually researching like old school classic cocktails from the early 1900s for a bar I was going to be the opening bar manager of. And I saw that there was a very common theme.
Yeah.
And almost all of those cocktail menus had mostly gin cocktails. A little bit of Spanish brandy was quite common.
Yeah.
But they're definitely, in the original golden era of cocktails, gin was definitely a focused spirit and probably the most common cocktail spirit in the world at that time. So, in these classic cocktail menus that feature these spirits, unfortunately, cocktails and cocktail bars, they kind of didn't cease to exist, but they kind of fell out of popularity for a couple of generations because of prohibition and many other issues.
Yeah, and now with the rise of the cocktail movement and craft cocktail bars appearing all around the world, you know, there is also a cocktail revival. Gin has definitely made a comeback because gin is a cocktail spirit. Traditionally, we don't do gin neats, but gin is best have in a cocktail, correct?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And I think, you know, that's a big thing. I mean, yeah, if you're like a gin nerd,
yeah,
you back there watching, you might sip it neat. You might even have a shot of it.
Yeah.
But generally, you know, that's more of like a whiskey shot, tequila shot. Definitely, those are more popular spirits for that, vodka mixed drinks. But I mean, with that, there's a tight correlation between cocktails and gin.
Yeah.
So you're totally right. I mean, like you almost always have it in a gin and tonic or a martini or a gimlet or name whatever gin cocktail, either classic or modern. And you know, the younger generations drink cocktails now.
Yeah,
you know,
we do,
when we were not to age us too much, but when we were first, you know, 18 or 21, where I was coming from in the States, you weren't going to cocktail bars.
No.
And not to say that everyone is these days, but I can tell you as a bartender, and for the past 15 years, definitely the past 5, I see way more younger generations in cocktail bars than I used to see. And so basically, in summary, all of these things are linked, right?
It is, yeah.
The revival of cocktails over the last 15, 20 years, the big boom in micro distillation over the last 15, 20 years, the kind of, not the changing of the guard, but just like a lot of new characters being brought into the party, you know. I would say, you know, Hendrick's Gin is a perfect example of one of the first kind of people really shaking things up, doing something quite different. And I think when you put all these things together, it's basically the reason, in our opinion, why gin is just continuing to grow and has been just on a crazy rise the last 10 years. And it's almost like we keep waiting for the bubble to burst, but it just keeps growing. It just keeps growing. And I think the more and more places that continue to have access to like distillation, you're just going to see more and more gin labels popping up.
Yeah, so I guess the Ginnaissance is upon us.
We are in the Ginnaissance.
We are in the
as we speak.
Yeah.
And I actually do like that term because, I mean, the history of gin is being written right now.
Yeah.
So thank you for joining us
Yeah.
on Gin and Talk. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next week.
Bye. Silence. Can you record?